I've always wondered, just where do people find all this iguana meat? We find big pots of iguana bits. We find iguana on a stick littering the wasteland. In every cabinet and cupboard, this stuff drops like candy. But I've never seen an iguana. Where are all the wandering bands of iguanas? We don't find any, not even in the form of a critter like we do with birds. I'd even be happy with some sort of mutated iguana. But no, we find all these iguana bits, but no iguanas. And it's not just in Fallout 4. The same is true in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. You'd think that we'd at least find some iguanas wandering the wastes in New Vegas. It is, after all, in a desert. But no, despite all of the iguanas on a stick we find, we don't actually find any wandering iguanas. What is going on here? Where do people get all of this iguana meat? To solve this riddle, we need to go back in time 126 years, to the year 2161. In that year, roundabouts December, the Vault Dweller first arrives at Junktown. Junktown is a scrapyard built out of rusted-out Corvaga cars, and it deserves its own video in its own right. But to learn more about iguana meat, we need to travel north from the Junktown entrance until we find a small, square, white shack labeled hospital. The proprietor of this clinic is a doctor named Doc Morbid. He says, "Hello, I'm Doc Morbid. Can I help you?" And we have three options. We can ask him for assistance, we can leave and say, "No, we don't really need anything." Or we can say, "Yeah, I need some help." He gives us a quick exam, and if we're injured, he offers to heal us at an exorbitant price. And if we are not injured, he still demands money. He says, "You seem to be in nearly perfect health." That will be 10 caps for the examination. Now, this is ridiculous. We can go to any other doctor in this wasteland, and if we're not sick, we don't have to pay them a dime. So we can either pay this guy his 10 caps, or we can say, "10 caps for you to tell me that? You have got to be kidding." "I never joke," he responds, "especially when it comes to physical trauma. You will pay me, or I will have to resort to other forms of compensation, many of which are much more painful than just paying me." Now, I read online that you can find an option here, if you don't have the caps, to allow him to perform experimental surgery on your body. If you do, he takes one of your eyes, and you lose one perception for the rest of the game. But no matter how many dialogue options I tried, no matter how high my speech skill was, I never actually found that option. So I'm not sure if it's true. But of the two options we do have here, we can say, "Okay, here's your money," we give him 10 caps, or we can say, "Bite me, I'm leaving." "Have it your way," he says. "Cougar, Flash, show our patient to the lab." With that, his two mercenary goons come from the next room and attack. Now, in order to gain access to Junktown, we had to store away our weapons, which means we have to spend excess AP to access our inventory and re-equip ourselves just so that we can defend ourselves. During the fight, Doc Morbid goes down a ladder in the back of his room. This must lead to his lab. Now, both Cougar and Flash are equipped with shotguns, and the first thing they do is close distance, making it difficult for you to flee. But if you have Ian with you, whom we found at Shady Sands, this fight goes much more smoothly. After they are dead, we can loot their corpses, and we find caps, shotgun shells, a shotgun, and leather armor, all of which is a pretty great find this early in the game. After Cougar and Flash are dead, Doc Morbid will come out of his little underground lab. He is not a fighter, he won't attack, but he refuses to do business with you anymore. You can kill him without a penalty. Normally when you kill an NPC like this, the entire town will turn on you, but the guards here will not attack you if you kill Doc Morbid. If we kill him, on his body we find a stim pack, some surgical tongs, and a first aid kit. With him dead, we can then loot his place without repercussions, where we find grenades and caps on one of the bookshelves. Now, I still have a lot of questions. Doc Morbid sicking his goons on me came as quite a surprise. So let's reload a previous save and start this encounter all over again. First, we can talk with Cougar. He says, "How's it going?" We say, "Great, and you?" And the Cougar refers to himself in the third person. He says, "The Cougar is always fine." He's not a man of words. You try and talk with him further and he says, "You need to talk with my man Flash here. He can help you out." But talking with Flash is not very satisfying. He just says, "Watch yourself around the dock and I won't have to get medieval on your face." Now, the official strategy guide for Fallout 1 tells us that there are some speech options with both Cougar and Flash, allowing you to intimidate them. But I believe those must have been cut from the game, because I didn't find them in my playthrough, and I couldn't find any reference to those intimidating speech options anywhere online. Plus, this character has pretty high speech, so if they did exist, I should have been able to get them. Well, Cougar and Flash are dimwits without a lot to say, and we already know what Dr. Morbid says. He just tries to swindle us. But let's see what happens if we try and go down into his lab. In his lab, we find a dwarf standing next to an ice cooler. The game is really cruel to this guy. If you inspect him, the game says, "You see a rotund midget." The poor guy. But this is Gretch, and he's not expecting company. When you talk with him, he asks you what you're down here for. Now, we can immediately detect by his speech pattern that this creature is not a creature of high intellect, and we have a number of options to get information out of him. There is, of course, the rude way. We can say, "Don't talk to me like that, cretin," in which case he says that he no longer wants to talk with you, understandably so. Or we can say, "I just came down here to see how you're doing." He responds by saying, okay. And this leads us to the same dialogue tree, as if we had tried to bluff our way in by saying, "Your boss sent me down here." We can then ask him what he's doing, and he says, "Body parts almost ready to go to hub." At this point, we know we're getting into some dicey territory. We can duck out by saying, "I don't even want to think about this." Or we can drop the facade by asking him, "For what?" In which case he wonders why we were sent here if we don't know what he's doing. Or we can pretend that we're in on it and say, "Of course, that's why I'm here." He responds by saying, "Iguana Man Bob send you. He happy. Lots of good meat." Why is this dwarf giving meat to a man named Iguana Bob? Where would a dwarf in a lab in a medical clinic get meat? And then suddenly the penny drops. Doc Morbid is selling human meat to Iguana Bob. We almost became part of a meal. When we refused to pay the 10 caps for the examination, Doc Morbid had his mercenary goons attack us to kill us and bring us down to his lab, where he would have butchered us and sold our meat to Iguana Bob. This is shocking news. We can back out and say, "Of course, I'll be back in a minute." Or we can attack the guy and say, "You sick little scab. I'm gonna cut you up and sell you as meat." Or we can confirm what we've already deduced and say, "He's selling human body parts for people to eat?" The dwarf responds, "Yes, Doc Morbid has best human bodies around. None better." We can again attack him here, or we can continue the ruse by saying, I'll be back to pick up the bodies in a little bit. Goodbye." Well, now we know what's going on in this lab, and from here on out, I don't feel too bad for killing Doc Morbid, his mercenary goons, or this butchering dwarf here. We can explore the place to see if we can find any evidence for what Gretch said. There's a table in the northeastern corner, but if we try to loot it, we don't have access to anything. There's a locker against the northern wall. We'll explore this in a bit. And then there's a bookshelf against the eastern wall. This is also empty. The table against the northwestern wall has some iguana on a stick. We can loot this without repercussions. There's a makeshift bed hiding behind the southern wall, and in the middle of the room is another metal table covered in some sort of biomass. But we cannot loot this table. Now, if we try to open up our Skilledex and use our lockpicking skill to unlock the locker, Gretch says, "Don't be messing with the doctor's stuff." This is his last warning. If we continue to try to unlock this locker, Gretch will attack. He does the same thing if we try to inspect that black ice cooler he was guarding. On Gretch's body, we find a 10mm SMG, which is a great little weapon to get this early in the game. Now, Gretch responds the same way if we try to inspect that black little ice cooler that he was guarding. With Gretch dead, we can now inspect it, and we learn that the cooler is filled with chunks of human organs and body parts. The locker is really tricky. If we try to pick the lock too much, eventually we'll trip up the tumblers, permanently locking the door shut. We don't get any more chances to pick the lock. If we're really unlucky, we'll trip a trap. This locker is booby-trapped with an explosive, and when triggered, destroys the locker and all of its contents. So first, we must open our Skillodex and use our trap skill to detect the trap. My trap skill is really low, so I had to do this over and over again until finally I detected the trap. Once detected, we then do the same thing over and over again until we disarm the trap. Once the trap is disarmed, we can then use our lockpick skill. And despite having a fairly high lockpick skill, and according to the Skillodex, a 61% chance to unlock it, I tried picking this lock over and over and over again for probably a good solid 30 minutes without any success. However, we learned from other players that the contents of this locker is one doctor's bag, a little over 800 caps, and some 10mm ammunition. Once we finish exploring the underground lab, we can go back up the ladder to the clinic. If we killed Gretch while we were down there, Doc Morbid and his mercenary goons heard the fight, and they instantly turn hostile. Doc Morbid will race to the ladder and hide in the lab while his mercenaries try to kill us. But if instead we didn't kill Gretch and we just backed away and tried to leave, we can confront Doc Morbid with our findings. A new dialogue option appears, and we can say, "I know about you and Iguana Bob, you filthy butcher." Doc Morbid feigns ignorance. He responds by saying, what could you possibly mean? Well, Doc Morbid, I had a little conversation with your troll, and Doc Morbid looks shiftily from side to side, and he says, "That proves nothing. Gretch is a little slow in the head. No one listens to him around here. You had better leave." And that's that. If we go back to Doc Morbid, he continues to offer his services. He'll say, "Oh, it's you again. I like your style, even if I don't like you." Now, you'd think that the guards here at Junktown would like to know that their doctor is secretly butchering people who come into the clinic for help when they don't have the money to pay for his examinations. But no, we don't have any option to alert the guards here. We have an option at the end that says, "If you're in charge of the guards here, I think I have some information for you." The guard will respond, "Yes, I am in charge of the guards here. What do you have for me?" But all we have is nothing. Just checking. I was a little bummed about this, but this dialogue is here for another quest in the town. Crime Lord Gizmo, the casino owner, works out of Junktown, and the guards have been trying to find evidence to oust him. This dialogue option exists to give the guards evidence of Gizmo's crimes, but sadly, not the crimes of Doc Morbid. And so we just have to decide what we want to do about this. Do we kill Doc Morbid and his goons without suffering any repercussions, or do we let them live and continue to sell human meat to Iguana Bob? But you know what? Maybe we should pay a little visit to Iguana Bob. Directly south of Junktown is the hub. It's a much shorter journey than from Shady Sands to Junktown. Following the road south from the entrance, we arrive at the market part of town. The market is vibrant and alive even at night. We find Iguana Bob and his iguana stand at the southernmost part of the market, directly in front of the gun shop. By all appearances, Iguana Bob's iguana stand seems to be a legitimate business. We even see actual dead iguanas hanging from the stand. We can then talk with Iguana Bob to sample his wares. If we ask for some iguana on a stick, Iguana Bob says, "Sure, we got a whole iguana on a stick for 20 caps, and our prime select iguana pieces for 8 caps. Interestingly, our choices here are, I'll take one of the real ones, and I'll take one of the prime cuts. So it looks like the whole iguana on a stick is the real iguana, and the prime cuts, the iguana pieces, are human meat. taking a look at our inventory, and the two food items do look very different. The iguana on a stick is an entire lizard stuck to a stick, but the iguana pieces are just chunks of meat with vegetables stuck on a stick. This meat could be anything. Since we already know what he's really selling, we have a dialogue option here to confront Iguana Bob. I think we need to talk about Doc Morbid and some of your secret ingredients. What are you talking about? He responds. Now, there are 4 options here. Each one has a different outcome. The second option, I found an invoice in Doc Morbid's lair, an invoice for dead bodies, causes Iguana Bob to respond with incredulity. He says, I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't appreciate your slander. I suggest you don't show your face around here again. And after that, he refuses to talk with us. When we stop by, he says, you've got a lot of nerve showing your face around here. Get lost. The third option is, if you've got a memory loss, I can talk to the sheriff. He says, don't do that. And then he confesses all. Fine, he says, I've been using some questionable portions. But it's not like I've been committing murder. Doc Morbid's stuff is already dead, isn't it? But cannibalism is a crime against humanity, Bob. I'm going to see that you pay for it. He says, wait a minute. We've got to find some way to reach a mutual understanding. We can take a hard stance here and say, the only way you'll be able to keep me quiet is to kill me. And with that, Iguana Bob attacks. The problem is that if you defend yourself, even without using weapons, even if you only use your fists, the entire police force in the hub becomes aggressive, and they'll likely kill you. If instead of forcing him into violence, we say, sorry, no deal, he responds, I'd change your mind if I were you, friend. People have died for less in the hub. And then ends the conversation. Now, I walked on over to the police station, which is just northeast of Bob's Iguana stand, and I talked with the police chief here, but we don't have any option to turn in Iguana Bob. That's because I found out later that there was a cut quest where we could rat out Iguana Bob and have the police chase him out of town. But the developers cut that quest from the game, leaving this dialogue option about going to the police the only remnant from that quest. So sadly, there is no way to turn in Iguana Bob and to stop his selling of human meat. Back at Iguana Bob, if we choose the bottom option and say, Prime Choice Select is made of people. It's made of people. This, of course, is a reference to Charlton Heston and his role in the famous sci-fi classic Soylent Green.
It's people. Soylent Green is made out of people.
Listen to me, Hatcher. You gotta tell him Soylent Green is people!
The result of this Soylent Green reference is the same as if you were to choose the first option, which is to say, you know, your secret ingredients. How fresh does the corpse have to be before it develops a bitter aftertaste? Do you use mutants, humans, or a mix? Iguana Bob is mortified that you're shouting this so loud where his other customers could hear. He says, not so loud. I don't need you saying that all over the hub. We can respond 3 ways. We can say, well, I guess I was rude. Have a nice day. In which case he just says, okay, and that ends the conversation. We can say, you know, the police station is just across the street. I really should take a little walk. This brings us back to that police station dialogue tree that we explored earlier. The final option is to blackmail Bob. We respond by saying, I can get even louder, but I can also shut up. Noise is cheap, but silence is expensive. With this, he relents and asks us to name our price. We can blackmail him for 50, 75, 100, 150, or 200 caps. Each one of these is a progressively more difficult barter check. If we fail, he says he's not paying us a dime, and he refuses to talk with us anymore. If we succeed, he says, fine, it's a deal. 200 caps due every few days. I guess I'll see you in a few. If we come back 5 days later, he pays us the caps he owes, and then we have an option to renegotiate the deal. We then go through the entire thing again, but our barter choices are higher. We can then renegotiate every 5 days, and the price keeps going up and up and up. There's no cap to it. So this is one way, if we have a high enough barter skill, to gain a nearly infinite number of caps. The only downside is we do lose 2 reputation points for the hub after every successful negotiation. We can also ask him if he has any more information on Doc Morbid. All he says is, Doc Morbid? All I know is he's up around Junktown and he's the cheapest source of food I could find. That's all. So our only option is to get a piece of the action. We don't have a way to shut Iguana Bob down. And it looks like Iguana Bob's success at selling human meat as iguana meat is canon, because in Fallout 2, we find his son running the family iguana store, continuing to sell human meat. But all of this happened on the west coast of the United States of America, 126 years before the events of Fallout 4. Was Iguana Bob's business so successful that it migrated even to the East Coast, where we find iguana bits in the Capital Wasteland and the Commonwealth? It must be, because we don't find iguanas on the east coast of the United States of America. Iguanas are native to tropical areas in Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, not to the east coast of the United States of America. And Southern California, Nevada, that's kind of pushing it. But we find iguana bits in all of these places. In Fallout New Vegas, we find iguana on a stick and iguana bits, but we also find human flesh. Here they are laid out side by side. As you can see, the iguana on a stick, it looks like a real iguana. The human flesh is pink and uncooked, as I suppose we'd expect, and the iguana bits are on a stick, just like we found in Fallout 1, and they're chopped up, so this really could be any kind of meat. In Fallout 3, it looks the same, and you can find iguana on a stick nearly anywhere. You can even buy it from the restaurant inside Tenpenny Tower. And it looks the same, it's a whole iguana stuck on a stick. So even though the iguana bits very well could be human flesh, the kind that Iguana Bob sold from his stand, at least some of the iguana must be made from real iguana, because we see whole iguanas stuck on these sticks. How do we explain that? If iguanas aren't found on the east coast of the United States, how do we explain so much iguana meat all over the place? Well, one possible explanation comes from the terminal belonging to Herbert Daring Dashwood in Tenpenny Tower. Dashwood was an explorer in his youth, and he took prolific notes on his terminal about all of the places he visited and the things he had seen. Under his section on pests, he has an entry on rad scorpions, and he says, "I've been a lot of places in my day, and everywhere you'd find those damned rad scorpions. Rumor was they had descended from emperor scorpions, which you could find in pretty much any pet store in the country when the bombs fell. I guess that explains their population." This brings up another point. We do find rad scorpions all over the place, but emperor scorpions, from which the rad scorpions descended, are also not found on the east coast of the United States. Dashwood's reasoning here makes sense. The rad scorpion population that we find in places where they do not naturally habitate must have evolved from pets, found in pet stores and people's homes, that somehow survived after the bombs dropped. Iguanas must be the same way. There's got to be some sort of population of iguanas that descended from pets held in pet shops and homes that also somehow survived, clearly without mutating too much, after the bombs dropped. Otherwise, our only conclusion here is that iguana on a stick is a big hunk of human flesh carved into the shape of an iguana. Ugh. Not a pleasant thing to think about. If true, then Iguana Bob's legacy extends even to the Commonwealth, because in Fallout 4, we find iguana bits, which look like a slimy concoction of mashed meat in a tin can, and iguana on a stick, which, unlike in all of the previous Fallout games, is not a whole iguana stuck on a stick, but is instead chunks of yellowish flesh skewered on a stick. And that is the shocking truth about iguana meat in the Fallout universe. All that iguana that your character ate very well could be people. But what are your thoughts on iguana meat in the Fallout universe, ladies and gentlemen? And did you like seeing some footage from Fallout 1? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you'd like to see more stories from Fallout 1, let me know, and I may make some videos dedicated to Fallout 1 locations and characters. I publish a new video 6 days a week, and if you want to make sure you don't miss my next video, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. I've got a t-shirt shop, folks. If you would like an Oxhorn or a Fallout-inspired t-shirt, you can find a link to my shop in the description below. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.